Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Illustration Department podcast. My name is Giuseppe Castellano. In this podcast, I talk to folks in illustration, graphic design, publishing, animation, and other creative fields about their work, the lessons they've learned, and the bumps and bruises they've experienced along the way. In this episode, my guests are Gorey fanatics and aficionados, as well as the folks behind the Edward Gorey House. On February 22nd, 2025, Edward St. John Gorey turned 100 years old. A gala was held in his honor. In the first half of the episode, I bring you around the gala. Please forgive the audio, it was loud. I tried not to blow your ears out. In the second half, I talked to Gregory Hischak, director and curator of the Edward Gorey House, about the life, work, and house of Edward Gorey. I hope you enjoy our conversations. So I'm here with Gregory at the Edward Gorey 100 Gala, 100th birthday bash, whatever you want to call it. Gregory, you want to tell the crowd a little bit about who you are and why the heck are we here?
I'm Greg Hischak. I'm the director of Edward Gorey House in Yarmouthport, Massachusetts. And we put together this gathering because it's Edward's 100th birthday, and we won't have a chance to do it again for like another 100 years.
Yeah.
So this seemed like a time to jump in.
I'm not sure I'll be here.
I might not be here.
Yeah, I'll work on it.
And honestly, I didn't think it would work out. But fortunately, I hired people who are younger and more energetic than me.
That's how you do it, I
who
hear.
said, let's do a gala. And nobody buys a $100 ticket on the Cape in February.
Apparently 170 people do.
But they do.
There you go.
So I stand corrected on that. It was a very good thing. I'm glad we did it because on my own, I wouldn't have done it.
Okay.
But as a group, we had a momentum that kind of made it come together. And we had help from the Ocean Edge Resort. They cut us a little bit of deal on the space.
Right.
And just did a gala. We called a florist. We called the band.
Someone brought cookies. I was there at the house when they delivered the cookies.
We hired someone to make cookies, and we did almost no press except social media.
Yeah.
And it sold out, and we added 40 or so tickets, and those sold out immediately as well.
Yeah. So I guess I have two very important questions for you. One is, do I get a freebie from the auction because I'm doing a podcast for you and promoting the event, although it will be after the fact, after when this airs? And if so, I'd like that print right over there. And the second more important question is, would Edward Gorey have liked this party or not?
The answer to both questions is no and no. I don't know if Edward didn't like big parties. I'm skipping your question. However, if you come to the house, we can make some kind of deal on something.
I mean, I just had to ask.
Yeah, we can make.
I don't care if it's like a electrical outlet from the house. I'll take that.
Yeah, we have those.
Okay.
I'm not even all that familiar with what is actually in the silent auction. Coco was handling that.
Okay.
But would Edward like this? It's really, and everything along those lines. Would he like having a museum in his honor? You know, we grapple with that on a daily basis, and we run the museum in a way that would least offend Edward.
Yeah.
You know, that he would go to it and go, oh, well, that's bullshit, but
that's your
tagline.
Like underneath. You know? I saw the signage. It was the Edward Gorey House. We're trying not to offend him.
Right. We're trying to do the least amount of damage.
The least amount of offense.
The least amount of damage to his legacy. And the gala is just like, oh, come on, Edward, it's a birthday.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, would he attend? I don't know.
I mean, he would have taken advantage of the freebie booze a little bit.
He would have. So,
okay.
You'd like to think that at some point you get a tear out of his eye. I mean, this is a man who would cry at Buffy the Vampire episodes.
Nice.
You know, but would he like to see the, I don't know, what's the word? The resonance that his work has on all these people. It's a big crowd. It's a weird crowd of people. There are different. It's a lot of ages,
for sure,
and they take him literally or not. But these are people who coughed up, pretty small, no small chunk of money to come and hang out with other Gorey folks.
Exactly.
We're pretty excited about that.
I'm excited too. And I'm going to go, I think we're going to go around. I'm going to talk to other people and just kind of get to that point. I'm going to ask them why they're here.
Yeah.
Because I think we're going to get a lot of different answers.
Please do.
All right.
And I hope they don't throw food at you.
Or they will.
I
mean, life is life, Just whatever happens, happens. Well, Greg, I really appreciate your time and enjoy the gala.
Thank you, Giuseppe.
So, hi. I had to get you after that announcement. So, would you mind telling the listener who you are, what you do, and what the hell did you just announce?
I am Coco Raymond. I'm the assistant director and archivist at the Edward Gorey House. I do a lot of things there, some of which involve moving heavy boxes around and some of which actually involve working with Edward's legacy, both of which are equally important. Yeah. And we just announced that the Edward Gorey House has formally acquired the building, the Edward Gorey House, which is a huge deal for us.
So I had a quick question here. When you announced that, all sorts of things were running through my mind, like, oh, I just learned that you didn't own it until now. You guys was that a joke that you were paying $1?
No, that's actually true. The Highland Street Foundation is wonderful and ridiculous and let us get away with paying $1 rent on Cape Cod during a housing crisis in 2025. We were paying $1 rent a year. And they do great work. They're an incredible organization. But the fact that we own the house now means that not only can we undergo really critical renovations to this 250-year-old building, it also means we can get grants, which is super cool.
Amazing. And there's a barn in the back. I mean, it's seen better days.
Yeah, the barn itself was actually built in 2 phases, one in the early 1900s and one when the house was first constructed, I believe in the mid-1800s. Right. And it's kind of falling apart. I love that barn to bits, but it's awful to go in there. I had a beam fall on my head once, and it made the funniest sound I've ever heard, but I also realized in that moment that this was not a good thing to be happening. Yeah. The barn needs some help, and now we can give it that help.
Yeah, we swung by the house this morning, and it's a lovely little home. It's just a lovely little corner of the world. But yeah, I walked around the patio and the front porch, careful that my foot didn't go through the front, beam or a plank. But yeah, it's a lovely little home, and I just wanted to be there for longer than we were there. But anyway, I don't want to take up too much more of your time. One more question, then I'll let you go. The future of the Edward Gorey House, what's it look like in your mind?
Yeah, we're really excited about this renovation project because it means we can turn the barn into a community space, which we hope to open in late 2026, early 2027. We're hoping to fundraise enough that we can turn the barn into a combo classroom and gallery that moonlights as a theater in the summer because our director and his wife are big theater nerds, and we're hoping to do a lot of theater programming this year in observation of Edward's birthday. I'm not sure how much Greg has talked to you about his theater work, but he has dozens and dozens of unpublished plays that no one's seen before. Really? People got a sneak peek in Carol Verberg's new book, but we're hoping to put some of those on. Anyways, the barn is a great space for Gorey Files to come together, and we're launching so much programming this year. I'm really hoping that the house becomes a gathering place for live preservation of Gorey's legacy. It's an incredible resource, and there's so many people who would love to take advantage of that, especially on Cape Cod. Sure. As a local history nerd, the Cape is struggling right now, and having a place where locals can come and be creative is absolutely essential. I'm really excited for this project.
Wow. Thanks so much for your time, Coco. I really appreciate it. This sounds amazing. Enjoy the gala.
Thank you. You too.
So I'm here with Jay Cooper, illustrator and author, and Jim Hoover, art director at Viking. We've had a fantastic road trip so far, the three of us, my 2 best friends and I. We're here at the Edward Gorey Gala. It's a little crazy. We've had our fortunes told, our portraits taken, and now we're having some dinner. But Jay, tell me a little bit about what you're experiencing, what you're feeling right now. I mean, what's going on?
Well, I mean, thank you both so much for coming up here. It's my birthday on Wednesday. I'm turning 51, and I found out last minute that they were having Edward Gorey's 100th birthday up here the same weekend, by the way, that the New Yorker is turning 100. Yesterday. The same month that Saturday Night Live turned 50, and I think also the same year at some point that I think WMIC, the radio station, was founded. So apparently everything happened 50 and 100 years ago that's culturally significant in America, or at least weird in America. But it's been great coming up here. I have been an Edward Gorey fan since high school. I don't remember how I discovered him. I was asked that earlier by another Edward Gorey fan, and I don't remember when, but I kind of remember him always being there, to the point where a couple of years ago I actually illustrated a book that is visually an homage to Edward Gorey called Your Guide to Not Getting Murdered in a Quaint English Village. So it's great to be here.
Yeah, I mean you're like an Edward Gorey disciple.
Aficionado.
Yeah,
Aficionado. That's a better
disciple.
word.
Yeah.
That's a better word. Nice, Jim.
Yeah, actually, I think I discovered Edward Gorey watching the Masterpiece Mystery series. I vividly remember that as a kid, sitting in the living room with my parents, just watching it on our big old giant glass TV. But yeah, when Jade told us that he wanted to come to this, I really didn't know what to expect. I was like, we're going to Cape Cod in February. Okay. It is pretty cold up here.
Oh, yeah.
But I've always loved the beach at winter time. It's just great seeing this eclectic crowd of people. This experience is not disappointing. This is pretty. I didn't know what I was expecting, but once we got it, I was like, oh, this is. I thought it was similar to what I thought it might be.
Well, I think we should give a little visual flair to the people that aren't here, because it's a podcast, obviously.
Right.
There's someone dressed as the Doubtful Guest, which is one of Edward Gorey's most famous works. There is a fantastically illustrated cake in the corner. I don't know if you guys have seen that. It's
Yes, I got a picture of it.
It's
Yeah,
fantastic. There's a fortune teller giving misfortunes. A portrait artist, and then
Very macabre.
And then the people that are dressed here, there's all kinds of people in mink coats and vintage baseball caps and such.
Yeah, a lot of Converse shoes I've noticed.
Yeah.
Actually, someone's Toyota is in trouble. Toyota and a BMW, folks. You heard it here first. This is breaking news on Giuseppe Castellano's Illustration Department podcast.
A bunch of 6-foot-tall cutouts of Edward Gorey illustrations all over the place.
Right. Yep.
Yeah, It's pretty great.
Yeah, it's really fun.
Yeah.
The other thing, I didn't realize what book town Cape Cod is. I mean, Edward Gorey's presence is here. I mean, everywhere we've been going, people have stories about him. And he passed 25 years ago, but he's still very much part of the scene, the culture here.
Right, we went to the Parnassus bookstore.
Yep.
The owner is the daughter of the previous owner who was friends with Edward Gorey, and Edward Gorey would spend his days volunteering at the bookstore and sorting books.
Right.
At this random bookstore that we didn't even know. We didn't choose it because of that. We just found out.
We just went into it.
And then I had to go get some socks for tonight to go along with my red suede tuxedo shoes, which are fantastic. But I needed black socks. And we stopped in and I mentioned why we were here. And the gentleman at the clothing store said, oh, Edward did a couple of Christmas bags for us a couple of years ago. We had them framed in the back. And when I was younger, I worked as a waiter at Jack's. What do they call it? Jack's Down Under or something like that. Jack Out Back. And Edward would come every breakfast and lunch in his mink coat, and he would have lunch at the bar. And so we would actually have lunch together and talk together. So there's a lot of real intimacy, a real sense of him as really being part of the community, which is I wasn't expecting that. I kind of expected a bit of a mild eccentric who kept himself a little bit aloof and apart, but he's not. He's a kind of really regular guy.
And part of the community.
And not a bad story. I have not heard a bad story about him.
Not one. It's been pretty great. Well, guys, thanks so much. Finish your dinners, and let's keep partying.
Thank you, sir.
All right. So I'm here with Jason Hart. Jason, tell me a little bit about Edward Gorey.
So I got to meet Edward Gorey a couple of times when I first moved to Cape Cod almost 30 years ago. I was working at a Barnes & Noble, and he would often come in to buy books and was, immediately recognizable as Edward Gorey. So I chatted with him a little bit at the bookstore, Later on, a couple of years later, I ended up working at a small store in another town where he would come in to buy rings that had eyeballs in them. And I got to chatting with him, and I was talking with him about first edition Charles Adams' Mother Goose and Grimm book that I had.
Yep, love that.
And really wanted to show it to him because I knew he would love it. We sort of made plans to get together for lunch, but we never actually had the chance to before he, passed away, which I'm really sad about, even to this day.
I mean, you missed it by months.
Yeah.
Right. You invited him in November or so, and he passed the following April.
Yeah, and he was just a really neat and interesting character, and I've been to his house a couple of times, and actually his house kind of inspired me to get on the kids' book path, which was kind of cool.
Wait, is this the Murder of Crows book?
Yes, the Murder of Crows book, which I won't talk about.
I was just going to ask you to talk about it, though. So now you have to. I'm just kidding. I assume that was never published? It still exists, though?
It does still exist in dummy form, and it's terrible.
Has it, in honor of Edward Gorey's 100th birthday, maybe time to revisit?
Only if I completely reinvented it.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. We'll leave it alone. Well, Jason, enjoy the gala. It's awesome bumping into you. And
it was cool to see you.
Cool. I'm here with 3 people who are wearing top hats, handlebar mustaches, glasses, dresses, Converse, bow ties. So what's going on here?
We're the thruples of Hertz.
Nice.
Instead of the triple twins or couple from Hertz. And the sex is in doubt, for they're never without their mustaches and long trailing skirts. And that is the 3 of us. That was our inspiration. We wanted to do something kind of fun. We wanted to... we weren't really sure how people would dress when they came here, and we thought some degree of costume would be kind of fun and in the spirit of Corey, and this was our choice.
You put me to shame. I didn't know how people would dress either, so I went very, very conservative, and now I feel like I should have gone a little more. I should have brought a little bit more to the game, and I didn't.
Well, I think it's kind of nice that there's a whole variety of people
there is.
here.
That's absolutely right.
Costume or not.
Yeah.
But everybody seems to enjoy the spirit of it.
So what is Edward Gorey, what's Edward Gorey mean to you?
I'm a big supporter of the museum, just as it is. Not financially, but I'd love to go to it.
Right.
And I just remember growing up on his illustrations, the PBS lead-in, and I love the black and white, the black pen. Ink. It's amazing.
Yeah. How about you?
We were just talking earlier, and one of the things I love to hear when I'm at the Gorey House is that his work was very difficult to categorize. You couldn't categorize it.
Exactly.
It was kids' books, but when
You
they were
wouldn't
for
want it
kids,
categorized
you
either.
wouldn't want to be categorized,
Right.
and I think that I find that hugely inspiring among many things. I love his drawings.
Well, you guys look great. I look terrible. Enjoy the gala. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you so much.
So Adele, what does Edward Gorey mean to you?
My earliest memory of Edward Gorey was listening to the PBS intro, where I am a featured character, and listening to the women going, "Ah, ah." And I remember being terrified. And I think Edward Gorey is about, to me, I feel like Edward Gorey is about confronting the things that frighten us.
Oh, yeah.
And also finding delight in them and exploring, I don't know, the maybe darker sides, but also the absurd and having fun. And I think Edward Gorey did all of those things.
Oh, yeah. I've been learning a lot about him. And I've written about him in the past. I've studied him. I know who he was, obviously. But this weekend has taught me a little bit more about him, just having conversations with folks like you.
Yeah.
And just out and about, having conversations with, people who work behind the counter at a clothing store, and they have an Edward Gorey story. Or everyone seems to have an Edward Gorey story.
Yeah.
But the one thing I think I've come to realize is he might have had pure connection to his true, authentic self. I don't know if... I'm sure there are other people who have embraced their individuality. How do I say it? it seems to me that he fully embraces individuality, could not care less about what anyone else thought about him, zero artifice, and what you get is this genuine individual that everyone here seems to love.
I think he's that. And I also do wonder about what part we never knew. He never had any romantic ties that we are aware of, right? And so crushes. I wonder about, yes, I think he definitely had some crushes, ballet related. But I wonder about the parts that we never got to know, the things that were private. And I think that is also authentic. So I agree with you. I also think he was a complex person, as I think we all are, and definitely continues to interest and intrigue us. I heard some stories myself today at the bookstore where we were.
Brewster's?
No, over at, I wanted to just say Parnassus.
The Parnassus book?
Yeah,
you were there today?
Yeah, we were there. Okay, we were there. So we're staying just a couple of houses up. And so we got to hear about how he was one of the 3 Cape Cod curmudgeons who would sit on the floors
and
sort the books. Yep. And it was fantastic. And we had a lovely chat over there about him. And I envisioned him in that space. And I think that's kind of the point, is we can see him all over here. Exactly. He is at his birthday party very clearly. He is here in spirit.
Although I did talk to Greg, and Greg, I think we agree that he would have hated this.
Well,
outwardly, but inwardly, I think he would have liked it.
I mean, he wouldn't have wanted people to make a fuss, I bet. But, I don't know.
We've had a good time, I think.
I bet. I'm having a good time. How about you?
I'm having a blast.
Yeah.
There is another, or one or two other bad ladies here.
I mean,
jealousy, or are you?
Have you seen me?
I mean, you're
I
crushing
have no reason to be jealous.
Literally crushing it. No, I know.
I think your viewers or your listeners, obviously, are probably going to also need to be viewers. They're probably going to need to see a picture.
They have to see this.
There's a visual.
There needs to be a visual.
Yeah.
I think they can imagine it. They're all
no one can imagine this. Just give the people what they want.
All right.
Put it up on the Instagram, the interwebs.
On the webs.
Do the thing. Yeah.
Well, before I go, I just want to say thank you so much for your time. Thank you for spending some time with me here in this corner next to this 6-foot cutout of an illustration of Edward Gorey's character. And enjoy the gala.
I'm already enjoying the gala.
See ya.
This podcast is produced by the Illustration Department, a global leader in online education for illustrators. Visit illustrationdept.com for offerings like mentorships and portfolio reviews, testimonials, our alumni showcase, our best-selling Substack, and more. That's illustrationdept.com. And now, back to our conversation. How are you recovering from the gala?
I recovered pretty well. There was a lot of loose ends. I had to go back there and pick up stuff. There are emails of thank yous to go out. There was some stuff on social media to go out. But it was nice. We were smart enough to realize that we should just spend the money and hire people to do things that people are good at. Whereas before we tried to do everything ourselves here, we thought, well, let's hire caterers to do the catering. And let's hire musicians to do the music and bring in the sound system. And let's hire a florist to bring in flowers. It was a brilliant revelation I never thought of.
Jim and Jay and me. I mean, from our perspective, it was a success.
Yeah, it was a success. It was. It was a very beige room. And looking at other photographs, I go, oh my God, that's a beige room. I decided to post the photos in black and white because, first of all, it's Edward, and it should be black and white. And also, everything just looked better in black and white for some reason.
Yeah.
You know? So something about black and white makes something feel, I don't know, more archival, more important.
Obviously, Gorey worked in black and white quite a bit. Was there ever documentation? Did he ever say out loud exactly why? Was he averse to color?
He didn't say why exactly. He did say that color made his brain want to explode. And he had to work in color a lot because he's an illustrator.
Right.
You know, he didn't have the luxury of just doing Edward Gorey-ish black and white things, except in his own books, of course.
Right.
Later on, late in his career, when he was hired to be an illustrator because he was Edward Gorey, and they expected that kind of colorization. But I don't know, it might all go back to his love of silent film.
Sure.
And he thought that's the prime example of storytelling. It was the most purest form of filmmaking. And so there's possibly some of that. Also, it harkens back to those 19th century engravings,
right,
which he spent a lifetime replicating in pen and ink strokes.
Right.
So, I don't know. I guess, again, like a lot of people thought, color, color, that's the thing that came out since I was born. And it just isn't nearly as interesting, you know?
Yeah. A few of his favorite artists were John Tenniel, or Tenniel, however I don't know how to pronounce that.
Yeah.
I'll never know how to pronounce that. And Thurber, James Thurber, who often worked in black and white. It's easier.
Yeah.
I mean, there's that.
There is that. Yeah, it's hard to say why he didn't, at an early age, he could have been working in color
right
away. Because he was also seeing a lot of his other influences were a lot of surrealism. And those were not black and white by any means. You know, they were lusciously colored dollies and the Cheerios that he was seeing as a kid.
Would you happen to know if he was inspired by or even knew about J.J. Granville?
I do not know.
Okay. Because speaking of surrealism, he was an illustrator a century before Dali sort of popularized it. Granville was a surrealist, and when you look at Granville's illustrations and Gorey's, you can see similarities and parallels between the two. A little macabre, delicate pen and ink line.
What was he? He's French?
Yeah.
What was he illustrating?
He was one of the first illustrators to anthropomorphize animals. So you'd see, not exactly this animal, but you see like a mosquito in a tuxedo.
Yes. Edward had some of that work. And we have one of those prints. We have something, I don't know the source of it. It's a French, and it's all these praying mantises dressed up in suits.
That's Granville.
Yeah.
I'll put money down on that.
What we have, and that was a loose page. Edward he collected old books, and he also frequently collected just the pages, loose pages from books that were being sold, somewhere in the village as a print. And he had several of those Granvilles, if that's the fellow's name.
Wow.
We had a couple of those, just loose. And those are some of those are color illustration.
Yeah. Sure.
I don't know if they're printed or hand colored. I guess it was really primitive kind of offset printing technique. They're beautiful.
Right.
And then who was the illustrator? Is it the same fellow? He worked for the Department of Works in Paris, let's say, and he did these remarkable exterior architectural renderings of buildings. But he always added this fantastical motif to the background, like herds of flying insects in the sky.
What?
Of this federal building. And Edward owned, and I don't know his name because it's a French name, it doesn't stick with me. Edward owned several lithographs of this guy. Fellow.
Yeah.
They're from the 1880s.
Do you know if he ever, I often talk about illustrators of the past, illustrators that we admire who during their lifetime struggled with being an illustrator or struggled with the definition of illustration or felt that they weren't up to snuff or up to par with their peers. Did Gorey ever feel that way? Did he think that his work wasn't where it was quote unquote supposed to be? Did he ever struggle with the definition of illustration or what it meant to be an illustrator for him?
He doesn't give any indication that he suffers over his identity as an illustrator. It looks like that to him it was a given. That the illustration was something that came to him and it came to him easily.
Right.
And it's hoarded all of his real work.
Yep.
I mean, Edward was extremely lucky. He moved to New York at a really good time.
Right.
When you move there in the 50s, there's a new magazine opening up every week. There's a new publishing house opening really every week.
Right.
Now a new one closes through the 80s and they started to close.
Right.
But he had so much work. And as soon as he got out of high school, he was being given projects for his parents, friends, and he was busy at Harvard.
Yeah.
I really think the only downtime he kind of had was in those brief, weird years after graduating from Harvard, which was 1950, and then moving to New York because he was offered a job at Doubleday, anchor. During that 3 years, he was he did a couple books for some people, those Merrill books. He did illustrations for this medical poetry, humorous poetry. And he did a lot of work for the Poets Theatre in Cambridge. He was doing a lot of playbills. He was doing set design. He was writing some plays. He didn't really worry about too much where he fit in as an illustrator. I think he was offered a job in New York, and he went to New York, and they gave him the job. He wasn't qualified for it, but he got it anyway, and it didn't seem to worry him. He used his technical limitations to great effect.
Right.
His ability to draw human faces. He had a very stylized approach to that. His use of color was limited to just those few colors that he felt comfortable with. At some point they sent him off to school. He writes in a letter to his friend Larry that he had to he was sent to typography school to learn about typesetting and stuff. This was through Doubleday.
Mm-hmm.
He was around other illustrators, but he really, once he's at that age where he's a working illustrator, all his influences are already in place.
Right.
He's working next to Glazier and Leonard Baskin and Seymour Schwast and Andy Warhol, but he's not at all influenced by those people, nor are they by him.
One of the things I sort of immersed myself in all things Gorey over that weekend. My friends and I, speaking of books, went to the Parnassus bookstore.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure you're familiar. And we didn't know that he went there. He essentially he could walk there from his house. And he went there because his friend owned the store. We spoke with his daughter, who now runs it. Not Gorey's daughter, the friend's daughter. And we just happened to walk in there. Yeah. And speaking of playbills, my friend Jay found 3 playbills that he had designed and illustrated, $5 each.
Oh, yeah.
Snatched those right up. But yeah, I mean, we walked in not knowing Gorey had any sort of footprint there. And of course he did. Then we just had conversations with random people around town. We went to a store to buy a pair of socks, and the person behind the counter was a waiter at Jack's Outback, which is where Gorey would have breakfast. And he told us a story about how he would sit down and during his breaks and talk to Gorey at the restaurant. You know what I mean? It just felt like he wasn't, I don't know why I thought he was a little bit of a recluse, but it sounded like he wasn't. It sounded like he was a man about town. He just sort of was a member of the community.
He did. He was. And one would assume he was kind of similar in New York. It makes you wonder, when he's put into a pot that big, what was he like in New York? Was he well known in the Village and Murray Hill and Madison Avenue? But here, I mean, you don't get the impression he was like that when he was living at the family house up the street in Barnstable. That was very insular. He stayed with the family, and I think they went to the Dolphin Diner occasionally, but mostly other meals were done at the house. You don't meet a lot of Barnstable people who remember seeing Edward, and he was there for like 30 years, summers at least. He spent 30 summers in Barnstable, and he didn't leave a big footprint, but in Yarmouth, he spends a mere almost 15 years here, and he's known by everybody. I mean, when the house is open, almost on a daily basis, people come in and say, oh yeah, he came into my shop, or he came into my dad's or mom's shop, or we used to see him come into this movie theater, or it looks like he tried to cultivate that kind of that aloneness thing, but nobody was buying it.
I mean, this could still be just me still basking in sort of the post-weekend Gorey glow, but my friends and I on the drive home, we're talking about how we need to, each of us, learn a little bit about how Gorey lived his life and sort of honor it and do something in our lives that is a little Gorey-esque, as in, visit the local cafe a little bit more often and sit at the counter and read the paper and have breakfast and talk to people, or just be more of a part of our communities as well. There was something about the way he lived his life that each of us driving home just felt really good about and felt happy about. Does that make sense?
Yeah, the more you delve into Edward and how he lived, God, there's so many exemplary ways of going through life. Here's a fella, when he moved here, he's 60 years old.
Right.
All he did was make new friends.
Right.
And he's not gregarious, but he obviously wasn't a wallflower. He may not have instigated any of the conversations, but he made some profoundly close friendships, not just with Ben Muse, who was running Parnassus, but with Helen Pons and Herb Sens. They were set designers at Cape Playhouse. He became good friends with Rick Jones, who was the fellow who hired me here at the house. Oh, there's tons of people. Barbara and Carol, all these people I don't even know. He was able, all the way up to his death, to establish new friendships, which is not something you'll discover as you get older, that most people lose that facility after a while. You're not that receptive to new people, new ideas, new communities, unless you're forced to, by going into senior housing or you have to move. Edward really embraced it. He seemed to have left New York and he didn't really give a damn. He knew he knew everyone in New York, and that city was greatly diminished by his leaving. Yep. And he didn't really seem to care. He just moved here and started all over.
Yeah. As a book designer, what I found really interesting, and this is something that I learned over the weekend, was after Harvard, Barbara, I forgot her first name at Doubleday.
Barbara, well, I think her maiden name was Zimmerman.
Okay.
When Edward knew her. And then at some point after Harvard, she married Jason Epstein.
Barbara Epstein, that's right. They knew each other from Harvard. That's how he got that job. And as a book designer myself, I found it really interesting that he didn't really know how to set type initially, so he did everything by hand. So he popularized the handwritten title type, the handwritten type, which is now all the rage.
Yeah.
And this is a guy who did it 70 years before designers in the 2000s and 90s started doing it and started thinking that they were all, like, ooh, look at me. Look, I'm handwriting this title type instead of typesetting it. Look how new and novel this is. Nope. Yeah. Gorey did it in the 50s.
I don't know enough about book design from the 1920s and 30s and 40s.
It existed.
I'm thinking of the original cover to The Great Gatsby or Tender Is Tonight. Yeah. Those obvious books that I've seen covers of. And it was all typeset for the most part, wasn't it?
Yeah, but there was some handwritten stuff. Like there was a Wanda Gog picture book that was mostly handwritten, if not entirely handwritten, by Wanda Gog and her brother, I think.
And maybe a lot of children's literature may have been putting it that way, right? But he used, like I said, he used his limitations to great effect.
Exactly.
And those covers, even the logo is drawn. Like they didn't have a Lucy-graph, or he didn't know how to resize.
Oh my goodness!
He did learn typesetting eventually. As I said, he went to school, because in the later Anchor Doubledays, we go through them all, and you start seeing the ones in the late 50s. You start seeing art direction by Edward Gorey, typography by Edward Gorey. And they're not referring to the cover because the cover was done by Baskin or somebody, but he was doing the layout, the text layout. Nothing creative, or he was just a workman type guy.
Yeah. How did you get wrapped up in the Edward Gorey House?
When was this? It's been a while now. It's been about 10 years, a little over 10 years. I started at the very end of 2013.
Okay.
There was an exhibit that was coming down that I had nothing to do with when I started at the end of the season. And then I did the 2014 exhibit, at least lay it out, design it. It was already written.
Right.
I was hired because Rick, previously mentioned, friend of Edward's, they knew each other from Jack's Outback. Rick was one of the co-owners of Jack's Outback.
Right.
Actually, he was like an investor of sorts, which meant that he had to eat there for free every day.
Right.
And so they got talking. Rick took over the house. When it became a museum, there was the first director, Rebecca Schroer or something like that, who didn't last too long. She had a large family living in this house, and she was distracted, and it wasn't a good marriage of sorts. And I think literally in her life and with the Gorey house, it didn't fit.
Right.
And Rick kind of took over as the interim And he held that job. He did it from 2004, 5, all the way to his final retirement in 2020. But at one point, by 2013, he needed someone to help carry heavy boxes of books.
Right.
And that was pretty much prerequisite for my job, which was one, can I carry these books up these 1820s stairs? And was I a drug addict? And if it was yes and no, then I pretty much had the job. It was reinforced by a couple things. And one was that he actually, the only time in my life, somebody called up all the references that I put down on my resume.
Oh my goodness.
You always hope nobody would do that, right? But all my references were on the Cape. And I worked as a graphic designer and as a writer, and I had taught poetry and do a bunch of art stuff. I had good connections with the folks who ran the Cultural Center of Cape Cod, Lauren Wolk, and with David Keene, who ran the Katuitt Center for the Arts. And those are two of the big kind of movers and shakers in the arts. And they had both specifically mentioned me as being the person who might be a good fit there. So that was nice. And so he had it on good authority. And I came there with a lot in my toolbox to an extent. Rick never cleaned the place, and I did. So that was nice.
Okay.
I was a designer, and so I'd never worked in exhibit design, mostly book design, but I added something immediately to just the signage, to the displays, to the press kits that went out, to posters. I was kind of articulate in talking to people because I was kind of a performer. Yeah. So I brought a lot of stuff that the house needed.
Yeah.
It was a very nice meeting of me and the museum.
Right. Gorey died April 15th, 2000.
Yes. Yeah.
Did you ever have a chance to meet him?
No, because I wasn't living here on the Cape. At that point, I didn't move here until 2005.
Oh.
And so I did not. Almost everyone I know has bumped into him.
Right.
Everyone else would go, oh, yeah, I saw him at Jack's Outback. Of course you did. He was there twice a day, every day for 15 years. Everyone knew. I'm around people who know him.
Yeah. Or
who worked with him or are related to him. Yep. So I'm well, and I live in his house. I'm in his bedroom.
I did not know that.
Not the same bed, but my wife and I share the upstairs with a cat and a lot of archives and inventory.
So it's really a house.
It's a house upstairs, and it's a lot of things. There's office space. It's big. The second floor is a little bigger than the first floor in some ways.
It doesn't appear it from the front. When you walk around it feels small.
Yeah, but you circumnavigate the house and you see it goes on and on and on.
Sure.
And there are areas that jut out.
Right, that back area that's covered by the magnolia.
At one point, probably used to be like for carriages to come in.
So now Coco is the one who picks up boxes.
I try to do it. Yeah, I do. But because I want to be polite, I help her carry boxes. Okay. She's all purpose. She's under 30 still, which means that she can answer technology questions.
For being under 30, the way they speak naturally with charisma, my friends and I were impressed with Coco's public speaking prowess and humor, and they just seem like someone who's really genuinely invested in all things Gorey. I feel like the future of the house is in good hands with Coco.
Yeah, and she didn't have a long history with Edward before this, maybe more than me, which was none, but she brings things to the table that I don't have. She has a great speaking voice, for sure, and technical prowess. And also there's lots of aspects of social media, as far as Instagram and TikTok, and that she delves into. Whereas I just kind of fumble around with Facebook, and she doesn't really touch Facebook because
there you go.
She's under 30. And Facebook is just a place where a bunch of dead people have pages, as far as she's, it's like a secondary.
Right. I do have a little bit of a confession to make. I tried to take something from the house. It didn't work though.
From the outside of the house.
Yes.
You're trying to take the tree.
In a way.
Oh, what were you trying to abscond with?
We were. The next morning, we drove by. We went to Jack's Outback to honor Gorey and have breakfast. Very good breakfast, by the way.
Yeah, it is pretty good. Yeah.
Headed over to the house. Your car was in the boat. 2 cars were in the air.
I think we saw. I thought we saw you guys rummaging around.
Yeah, we were rummaging around. Anyway, we took a bunch of magnolia seeds from the tree, thinking that we could bring them home and plant magnolia trees in our yard. Turns out the seeds don't exist, only the husks.
Yeah, the seeds have fallen out already.
Right. So come July, August, maybe September, I might email you and say, hey, do you mind FedExing me a bunch of seeds?
Yeah, if you pay the postage. Yeah, you want to get those husks when the seeds are bright red.
Yeah, they are
beautiful, and they kind of pop out around Christmas time.
Oh,
so you have this perennially green tree with all these bright red berries coming out at Christmas. It's really they're like chiclets.
I didn't know it was that late. So we weren't that late. We were 2 months late.
No, but the animals have had a few months of eating them all.
Darn.
A few people have had luck. Occasionally obviously it sprouts here. Well, I can't say that. I mean, the tree was brought here from from Virginia.
Yeah.
About 100 years ago. But shoots pop up, are popping up from it all the time. And I've seen small ones growing out of the gutter until the gutter cleaners come and take them down. Some people have had luck with them. They got the seeds. This is for your technique. And they froze them for several weeks.
Okay.
And then they planted them.
That makes sense. It's freezing in January and February when they fall.
They needed cold weather to activate them.
This isn't the last time you and I are going to have a conversation about magnolia seeds, by the way. And the reason we're putting this out is because that tree is massive.
Yeah.
Massive magnolia tree. And I just wanted to take a little bit of the Gorey House home with me.
Yeah, you can certainly do that. And you can take a branch home, all right, because it's encroaching on the house quite a bit.
I'll bring my chainsaw up next time.
An arborist who was supposed to be here last week to kind of trim it back away from the house delicately, he had to cancel until March, which makes me nervous because at that point, the tree is doing stuff. It's getting ready to open up leaves at that point.
All right.
Planted by the last of the Simpkins, which at that point was the spinster Simpkins sisters.
Easy for you to say.
Let me wipe off the screen after saying that. It was much better saying that when I had face masks on during COVID. Right. They brought the tree up, and it was about a couple of years old.
Okay.
So it was like in a coffee can. It was a sprout, knee high, maybe. I'm guessing it was in a coffee can.
It's beautiful.
They planted it in the yard about 1925.
Oh my gosh!
So
100-year-old magnolia. It's worth it. I mean, just that as well as the house, obviously, and what's in the house, and all things Gorey is something certainly to behold. It was beautiful, and also the dragon stones in the backyard.
Well, Edward put those in, and those are disappearing in the yard just by nature. Those need to be archaeologically unearthed and put on top. Though it does make for easier lawn cutting in the meantime. But the tree might have been. The tree might have been, an active part of what drew Edward to the house, because he had this kind of fantastical tree that shouldn't be growing here, stuck in the elbow of the house, protected by the house. It wasn't as big as it obviously was as big as now. It seems to have really gotten bigger recently, and I think some of that has to do with climate change. And our winters are getting milder.
Yeah.
And previous winters have killed the tree back until it was lower than the house, but now we don't get those winters. We haven't had those winters.
We have.
The tree's getting kind of big.
Good Lord. You can have ours. I just remembered that there are illustrators listening to our conversation. So let's turn our attention away from trees, sadly.
Okay. And for all the arborists who are listening, they really have
they just had a field day. Exactly.
Did you wait? One more arborist thing for those arborists out there. Did you go across the street and look at the Weeping Beech tree?
No.
Well, next time.
All right, next time.
The Weeping Beech behind the Bangs Hallett house across the street is an astonishingly beautiful. It's a weeping thing that is cavernous. You can go inside of it, and that also is about 120 years old.
That's all the reason I need. I'll be right up. See you next weekend.
There are a lot of interesting trees in the neighborhood. A lot of destination trees, we like to say.
One of the questions I had posed on Instagram under Lisa Brown's article, she had posted about Gorey on his birthday.
Oh, in the New York
in
Times.
The New York Times, yeah. Hi, Lisa, if you're listening.
Hi, Lisa.
I posed a question. Would Gorey's books be published by today's editors? I say no.
I don't think so. Publishing being what it is.
I don't think so either. And I was talking to an illustrator the other day who had I forgot the word, but she had a really interesting word in her manuscript for her picture book. And I can't remember what it was. It was something like bedazzled or something. I can't remember what it was exactly, but it was really interesting. It was like, nice job keeping that in there. And she said she had a critique group, and a member of her critique group had told her that she needs to remove it because kids won't understand it. I just wonder if Gorey ever had that conversation with somebody. Yeah. I mean, there are words that I saw him use that I can't even pronounce. And that's fine. I'm going to look it up and figure out how to pronounce it.
Nothing in Edward's works, his own books, his 116 self-authored books, nothing in there has an iota of editorial manipulation. Nothing was changed by any editor at any time. If they offered a suggestion, if they looked at the glorious nosebleed and said, okay, if you get rid of the L page, he exposed himself lewdly, well, publish this. If they did that, Edward would just stare at them blankly and then pick up the artwork and take it to another print house.
Right.
Nothing was changed. Typos were fixed, as we can see, because he patches over his artwork where he spelled a word wrong or changed his mind about a position of something. But those books are an unfiltered voice, of this man, both visually and in vocabulary and narrative. He only got away with them because I don't know how he got as many publishers as he did, but he did. And he was able to do it because he wasn't living off of those books. He was living off of his illustration.
Right.
He was getting a paycheck from Doubleday or as an illustrator and making good money as an illustrator. And all of it subsidized these works, which, I mean, now he would only exist as a blogger or as a zine creator. Really?
I think so too. The Ghastly Crumb Tinies would absolutely not get published today.
Yeah. Even though it's a very influential children's book.
For sure.
It's still not a children's book. I mean, initially it was created as a parody. Well, Edward, okay, I keep backing into myself. Edward created it as a children's book, which shows that Edward is what he thinks about childhood. But it wasn't published as such. It was published as an adult book, as all of his books were really, except for Leomp and The Bug Book. Those are his two books that were published for the children's market. Everything else, which he considered to be children's books, the publishers would go, no, we'll publish this, but it's going to be an adult book. It's going to be for the adult market. Right. Really, they had no idea who the market was for Edward's works. Publishers liked the work. They thought it was funny and weird, but they had no idea who the market was or how to market it, or even if the ability to get to those people even existed in those days.
Yeah.
How do you get to that weird subculture market in the 1960s and 70s?
I've asked sort of a similar type of question with other curators or other stewards of collections and that Eric Carle Museum, Brandywine Museum. The question is, when you're sort of surrounded by artwork of whoever it is, N.C. Wyeth, Eric Carle, whoever, for long enough, the art will tell you a little bit more about the artist. Like if you're paying attention, you might learn something about the artist. Have you, over the years, being surrounded by all of his work and thinking about him and working for the house and all of that, are there little revelations or just like sweet little pieces of trivia that you've learned, you've gained through the years working at the house?
Well, there's a lot of yes. I've been working on it I've been working with Edward for 10 years now, 11 years. There's a bunch of stuff on different levels that I discovered. The first one was his narratives and how his stories unfolded and how there were things hidden in the stories that lived up to his profession, that a book is a successful piece of art is really a piece of art that seems to be about something, but is in fact about something entirely different.
Right.
That kind of struck me after looking at some of his books, where I found different ways into the books. And then in working with, as a designer, working with Edward's work and looking at that work, first looking at original artwork a lot, and then scanning that work and looking at that work at 800% or whatever, filling a screen with those strokes and looking at how that stuff worked. I had this amazing appreciation of both the tenacity and kind of the obsessive compulsiveness of the person doing them. And then after all these years and looking at all this artwork and then seeing even more artwork and going into the archives in New York and seeing even more artwork that's never even been seen by anybody, you started to realize, how did he possibly get this much work done? How can somebody be so prolific? Because we're hardly even looking at the commercial work.
Right.
You know, all that stuff, all that artwork that is lost, now thrown out, or shows up at auction blocks. You know, all those John Belair's books, all those magazine, all that newspaper stuff, all those book covers, that hardly even including all that stuff. He has all these thousands and thousands of other drawings and partially finished books, finished manuscripts. Just the sheer amount of work that one person could get out is really kind of, I stumble. I'm awestruck as the years go by, because more and more is added every year when we focus on another exhibit. And it's like, oh, here's another body of work we haven't looked at, and another series of dots that need to be connected. So the very fact that after all this time, you keep finding more work and more connections and more dots that start to be connected, it's really pretty interesting.
There's a great quote of his that I share on his birthday every year, and it goes, "I am a person before I am anything else. I never say I'm a writer. I never say I'm an artist. I am a person who does those things."
Yeah.
Not much into labels for anything.
Yeah. Yeah, he was a man who disliked labels immensely because he thought they'd be very limiting.
Right, personally or professionally.
Yeah, for both. It's really hard to pigeonhole Edward where he is, just in his sexual orientation, and he likes it that way. He prefers living in all those gray areas. His books are unmarketable. They seem to be marketed to no one but Edward Gorey, and he likes that. Because if it was like a children's book, then it would only be marketed to children, and then adults never see it, and vice versa. He likes the fact that nobody's sure who purchases these books.
Maurice Sendak was a little bit like that.
Yeah.
He has a quote to that effect. I write books, other people tell me what kind of books they are.
But they were definitely mostly, I feel they're mostly marketed as children's books.
For sure.
Yeah, and I haven't delved too much into Sendak's life. I've met a lot of people who know him, and we've talked to it's not quite a museum, but his house, his foundation in Newfield, Connecticut, I think. They're interesting folks. They're really interesting. And, Sendak and Edward were friends. They were kind of doing the same thing, and they're both kind of the same type of people. They're both very closeted gay men living in the 1950s and 60s, 70s New York.
Yeah.
They both had day jobs. I mean, Edward hired Sendak to work at Doubleday.
I did not know that.
Yeah, he was a freelancer there. Edward also hired Seymour Schwast.
Podcast guest.
Yeah.
He hired Warhol when he was an illustrator before he became...
as a freelance illustrator. I've only found one book by Warhol. It's a nice one, The Contessa, I think it is.
Mm-hmm.
It's beautiful. And Sendak always kind of stayed. Again, I don't know the full breadth of his work. This man did a lot of stuff too, but he always kind of stayed situated within the world of children's literature, like Eric Carle.
Right.
Whereas Edward kept moving. Suddenly he's a set designer and costume designer.
Right.
He's a book artist. He's a zine maker. He's making movable books, illustrating children's books. He is all over the place. And he seems to like that.
Yeah, I like that too.
And also it's nice because it doesn't seem like he had any agenda. He did all this stuff because he didn't know what the heck he was doing. When John Wolpe calls him up in 1972 and goes, "Hey, I'm doing this revival of Dracula. Would you like to do set and costume designs?" Edward just he's busy, with his own work, and Amphigory just came out and with his illustration work, and he goes, "Sure, that sounds fun." And he just started doing it. Or, I've never done etchings before. Right. I'm going to learn to do etchings or fabric arts or needlepoint.
Something to be learned by that.
Yeah.
Certainly something to be learned by that. In this era, seemingly where illustrators are told they can only do one thing, let's remember Edward Gorey a little bit. Yeah. You don't have to do one thing.
Right. He did all of them, which meant that, again, you get back to that tremendous amount of quantity and quality of work that he put out on a commercial level and as kind of an avant-garde artist. He got to do whatever he wanted because he also did the other stuff that paid the bills.
Yep. And
usually people could only do, it's an amazing amount of energy for a man who professed to have very little energy.
This sort of ties into his motto. His motto is, "Oh, the of it all."
Yeah, that's a tough one, isn't it?
I love it. And I learned that, obviously there's the omission of the noun there, and there's something about his love of Japanese literature that focuses on, less is more. The leaning toward that sort of provides insight into why he hated Henry James so much, because Henry James was the opposite.
Exactly. Yeah, the total opposite. Right.
So what's the of it all mean?
Oh, the of it all. There's a bunch of different ways of saying it, but it sounds like a complete thought until you break it down and you go, it is. It goes back to Edward's training or immersion in Japanese literature and culture. And that happened in the 1940s when he was in the service. He was taking classes in Japanese literature. He was going to be a cultural liaison during the occupation. Nice. That never came about. But that changed him. The idea that you can remove everything, and the more elements that you removed from a story, the remaining elements were made stronger by that. Of course, true in anything, but Edward would take it like with haiku. He took it to the point where it's extremely powerful and succinct, yet open to interpretation.
Yeah.
So you have to give up some control when you do that, because you've allowed your book to be open to interpretation. And the of it all works so well because it is up to the individual viewer or speaker or whoever's exposed to that to fill in the blank of what that word is. And that's what Edward liked so much.
Well, Gregory, I don't know how fanboy this is going to sound, but I've talked about this on the podcast over the years from time to time, not often. But, the age-old, should I get a tattoo question that most people ask. I am open to getting a tattoo. I don't have one. I never knew what I was going to get. That's what was stopping me until I came across, the of it all, in that illustrated little ribbon. That's my tattoo.
I think Coco beat you to it, though. I think she already has.
That's okay.
Edward's greatest legacy, or at least for the people alive today, might be all these skin art that he generated. You don't see a lot of Sendak. I don't know, you might. I mean, you don't see a lot of Norman Rockwell tattoos.
That would cost a lot of money. Get a Rockwell.
Yeah, it would. And it'd be kind of homespun and stuff. You don't see Thurber tattoos. So to be honest, I would like to have a Thurber tattoo.
Oh my God. Thurber?
Yeah.
Oh, right. For sure.
I'd like to have the sill behind the bed, I think.
Oh, that's a great piece.
Any number of things. But Edward, his work lends itself to that, and also because it lends itself to interpretation.
Right.
It's never one thing or another. Oh, the of it all.
Oh, God, I love it so much for all those reasons. For folks listening who want to know this kind of thing. I do too. I'm in this camp. Would you happen to know off the top of your head what ink he used, or did he use a nib? Was his favorite tool a piece of wood? Like, what did he use to make his marks?
I can go on and on. I sometimes get the terminology wrong, but he seemed to use mostly Pelican black ink.
Okay.
When he worked in colors, he was using little sets of gouache.
Okay.
He also had sets of dyes. In a lot of his illustrations, he uses dyes for some of that color art. I think they're Winsor Newtons.
Okay.
Those things keep their vibrancy, that artwork. We had the artwork to the Tunnel Calamity just here over last season. And, this woman's stole or piece of clothing has this yellow or magenta dye that came down. And it's for a 40 or 50-year-old piece of artwork. It is astonishingly vibrant. Yeah. But I guess we're looking at 15th century paintings still. But as far as his nibs, he was using a Gillotte. I think it's a hard G. Gillote, French company. Mm-hmm. He was using those nibs for almost his entire career, different numbered ones. Those nibs would go down to a thinness that is astonishing, that the line was so thin. Again, these are nibs that he's dipping into the ink, right?
Yeah.
That line work almost looks gray. It is so thin.
Wow.
They ceased production, if not the whole line, or at least the really thin ones. And Edward went through those a lot because they would break. It's like having a freshly sharpened pencil that the tip breaks off after the first time you use it. He would go through half a dozen nibs in a drawing sometimes for some of that stuff. And in the 1980s, they ceased production, and he moved into another brand called Titquill, I think. He didn't like him, but that's what was valuable, really, and it's all about supply and demand.
Yeah.
His line work changes noticeably in the 1980s because he shies away from that really fine, detailed cross-hatching because he doesn't have those nibs anymore. And the work takes on a much simpler aspect. Look at the artwork for The Shuffled Story or for the Bah Humbug. What's it called? The Haunted Tea Cozy. The Headless Bust. His line work takes on aspects of kind of woodcut a little bit. Very simplified, a lot of white area. It didn't have to do with eyesight. His eyesight was keen and precise until the day he died. And his hand did not shake. He was doing amazingly facile work all well into his 70s, but he didn't have the equipment to do that work that he used to do. And so his line work changed. He claimed that when he switched over to Titquill, no offense to that company, but he goes, I never really quite enjoyed drawing as much after that. But then at that point, he's also working in fabric, and he's doing etchings, stage work, and he's doing needle point. So maybe the drawing was less of an aspect. Maybe it wasn't as important at that point in his life.
Yeah. Well, as much as I'd love to talk to you about Gorey for the next hour, I do need to go food shopping for dinner tonight. So, and I need to leave you to your Gorey things and your lovely home and whatnot. So, remembering that we have Gorey fans and illustrators and all sorts of folks listening to this, what do you think he would say if he was asked to provide insight or advice to illustrators?
It's hard to say. Edward hides his benevolence very well underneath his carefully manicured demeanor. He would probably say, he would say hell. He'd say, how the heck should I know? But,
I'll take it.
What he would say, because I just don't know what he would think of this world.
Right.
There is something clever in there, but I can't quite think of it.
All right, so let me rephrase the question.
Yeah.
What can illustrators and any other creative type learn from the way Gorey lived and worked?
It seems like the way Edward went through his career, you could say that he flourished in spite of the work that he was doing, because he was open to a lot of different ideas and directions. For a man whose artwork looked maddeningly similar over a period of 50 years, within that, he was really bouncing in all sorts of directions. He was never scared of trying a direction. He was never worried about marketability because he made sure that there was an aspect of his work that was marketable. And having done that, opened him up to do anything in the world he wanted to do. So it's kind of inspiring, but it also means that ahead of you in your life, there is a lot of work to be done. You probably shouldn't spend too much time listening to podcasts because there's so much work to be done.
To learn more about Edward Gorey, visit edwardgoreyhouse.org. If you find value in this podcast, consider supporting it via our best-selling Substack or Patreon. While each offer different benefits, both provide access to dozens of exclusive episodes we call Extra Credit. You can find links to both on our website or show notes. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.